Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Wisdom Distillery. I'm your host, Shaman John. Just getting over a bunch of sickness ravaging the household this last week. Kind of knocked us out for the week, but we're coming back around. I will tell you, what kept me from going into full-blown flu mode was full tablespoons full of chopped garlic and honey every day, multiple times a day. Cold water showers, and tons of supplements. So if you're edging towards sickness, give the garlic trick a try. I think you might find it quite helpful, but definitely soak it in some good raw honey before you do it, because it's tough. So my guest today is Danny Pernick. He's with a company, he's actually the founder, or co-founder at least, of a company called Open Currents. And it's a really cool concept, basically incentivizing altruism, incentivizing that philanthropic nature that hopefully exists within all of us. I'll let him describe it in more detail, but for now, let's have a quick listen to a little Otis McDonald. Hey, welcome to another edition of the Wisdom Distillery. Today our guest is Danny Pernick with the organization called Open Currents. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, man. So let's get a little backstory on you before we get into the this company that you founded or co-founded, and kind of see what a little bit the evolution of your journey is. What your interests are, where you started, how you've come to this place, and what you're trying to do.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. So my passion really started from this desire to kind of understand each other and understand people and understand myself. Kind of started in psychology and wanted to understand where we are now to get an idea of how to get where we're going or where we want to go. And from there, I didn't actually end up getting my degree in psychology, but kind of branched off into marketing and statistics, kind of both connected to psychology in different ways. But just always had a passion for kind of finding another way. And I think that's very much rooted in the various ventures that I've been a part of. This is kind of my second startup. The first was mostly a learning experience more than a kind of traditional success, maybe. Mm-hmm. And so I've just kind of come to really see some ways that I think we can take steps from where we are now towards a really kind of transformational model of culture and exchange.
So what was the area of? Let me ask, what do you think wasn't working for you? Like, usually these things are, there's a seed of dissatisfaction or a seed of dissatisfaction, just feeling like something's not working here or it could be done better. So where is that line for you? What exactly happened for you that made you start thinking that way?
Yeah. For me, it had to do with seeing the people in my life and my friends who were awesome people and are awesome people who have been giving so much to those around them, but not necessarily receiving in the way that I felt they could and should. Mm-hmm. And, with my personal pursuits and startups, always kind of wanting to put money kind of on the back burner and kind of focus on the mission first, and trusting, seeing ways that money would come, but ultimately not making decisions, kind of just trying to get that paycheck.
Right.
And so that was really the seed for me of seeing all these awesome people who weren't really getting what they deserved
for their
return.
efforts.
Yeah.
And what was the first organization that you said was the learning experience?
Yeah, it's called Saplings, and that the mission of Saplings was to connect creators all over the world by shared passion and complementary skills. And definitely something that is still a great idea in my mind, and still has a ton of potential. We just never really quite got the team together and really moving forward as a unit to make it happen. But definitely something that I would like to see exist in the future.
So then you switched over to this new concept, open currents. Talk to me about why you sort of put Saplings on the back burner. I guess you sort of mentioned that a little bit, but there's the old like just forge ahead, until it does work,
Right.
or jump ship and start another thing.
Yeah.
So what was that line for you, and then what are you trying to achieve with Open Currents? What's the mission statement of that?
Sure. Yeah. The transition really stemmed from the fact that more and more of my attention was naturally drawn to this idea. I'd had this frustration for a long time where no matter how many ideas I was coming up with, at the end of the day, they didn't change anything kind of on a fundamental level, and it was still kind of working inside this socioeconomic model that I saw as fundamentally broken. And also just this knowing, just innate knowing that it can't possibly survive forever, and there has to be a better way that will actually work in our present day. And so just naturally, I think there was a certain stagnation that I was feeling with the previous endeavor, and an excitement and energy around Open Currents, where whenever I talked about it, I was fired up and I was getting other people fired up, and that was, that's really what I thrive on.
Yeah.
So, the mission of Open Currents is that we all may live on the good we give.
Nice ring to it.
We spent a lot of time on that.
I bet. We all may live on the good we give.
That's right.
That's good.
And so I can share a little bit about what we do. So Open Currents lets nonprofits reward their volunteers for their time with a new currency called the current. And so for every hour that you volunteer with a nonprofit, you create and earn a current, which can then be used with participating businesses for partial payment. Beautiful.
And where are you along the line with this project?
So we have we're almost to the end of our 6-month kind of MVP build, getting our minimum viable product ready and tested. And so we've been testing with a few nonprofit organizations and actually creating currents, and then have a few test businesses on board who have actually been accepting currents.
Receiving currents.
And we have the first currents redeemed by businesses as of a month ago.
And what do the currents look like? Are they all just virtual at this point?
Yeah, they are. They're digital. It's a number in your currents account, basically.
Okay.
But there's we have talked about the possibility of a physical kind of
a little
symbol,
a little funny money.
Yeah, more not exactly ones that are exchangeable, but more of kind of like a
logo of, almost in a way, or something. Yeah, just a brand,
an investment kind of thing.
So, like Bitcoin has an image,
right? And so we have kind of our brand there, and so the the logo, Open Currents OC. My first attempt at the logo was to put a C inside of an O.
Yeah.
But that was just the copyright symbol.
Right.
And so I switched it.
That symbol is copyrighted because it's the copyright symbol.
Yeah. So I got the O inside of the C instead.
There you go. Switch it up. Are you familiar with, there's been I just recently watched some documentaries on YouTube that were about these little towns in the UK that were essentially creating their own currencies, specifically as an addendum to the pound.
Mm-hmm.
But to really be able to track and see where the money goes and how it gets extracted from or put back into the communities that they operate within.
Yeah.
And
Whole Coin, I think, is the name of that one.
Okay.
If I'm thinking of the right one.
Yeah.
But there might be more than one.
Yeah, I think there's a few different ones because like each community sort of had its own version of it.
That's cool.
There was the documentary kind of covered several little towns that were kind of doing their own versions of it.
Yeah.
And it was I just thought what a novel idea, and that the UK government didn't seem to care.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like you just get your ass handed to you here if you tried to do something like that. Maybe not, but
Not
yet. Yeah. I mean, but it's such a cool idea because it's a really, I feel like more and more things are going to have to be, power structures in terms of top down just need to be dismantled.
Mm-hmm.
And that, rule of, control over resources and that sort of thing needs to be a much more horizontal decision-making system than a top-down kind of decision-making system, and that can only happen in small, in a small organizational function. By the time it gets to thousands and thousands of people, it's too much.
Yeah, and with that kind of top-down versus bottom-up approach, we are really kind of challenging the paradigm of kind of how public goods are funded.
Mm-hmm.
With the current model, government, one of the kind of bases for why government is necessary is, to answer this question of who pays for public good. Right. It's pretty easy to know how to buy a cup of coffee because somebody's making a cup of coffee and somebody's drinking it.
Right.
But with public goods, such as water, cleanliness and air pollution and so forth, everybody benefits. So it's a question of who pays.
Right.
And so, the government model says, okay, well, pay us taxes and then we'll decide what's needed for the community.
Right.
And so what we're saying is ultimately, well, let's give the community the right to decide what gets funded.
Right.
And so the community ultimately says, okay, these nonprofits are doing work that we value, and so let's give them the right to actually issue currency to the volunteers who are getting the work done.
Yeah.
And we don't need to be told, we don't need an intermediary to decide what gets done and what doesn't.
Right. And they don't need to go and beg some external authority for the resources to pay the people to do the work, when basically they can directly now compensate those people who are doing the work, who are getting the job done with this currency that you're talking about.
Exactly.
So you said, you've had some exchanges. How has that gone? And what were the examples, if you can share those?
Yeah. So it's gone really well. We have a model where businesses actually don't have to change anything at point of sale.
Mm-hmm.
So they actually accept full price from the customer like they normally would, because, training a whole staff on trying to accept something new or doing something on your phone is a nightmare.
Totally.
So the customer pays full price, and then the business has agreed ahead of time to say, okay, we can accept 25% of payment for services in currents, for example. And so if I paid $10 for something, then I upload my receipt on Open Currents,
Mm-hmm.
and then we actually invoice the business at the end of the month for the amount that they agreed to accept. So each current is worth $10. So $10 per current, or $10 for your volunteer hour. And so if I buy something for $10 and they've accepted 25%, then Open Currents invoices the business $2.50, takes a transaction fee, gives the remainder to the customer, and then the customer gives 0.25 currents back to the business. And then that business can either keep those currents as an asset, or they can actually donate it and receive a tax deduction, because we have a nonprofit as well as a for-profit, so that we can actually give deductions back to the business for valuing volunteer time.
Okay. And was that aspect of giving of the person with the volunteer giving currents back to the business, when was that, or like how was that introduced? Because that seems to incentivize the business, but not necessarily, sort of potentially de-incentivize the volunteer.
Well, so then,
I guess because the value of their time then gets less. Right?
Well, yeah. So I might be misunderstanding the question, but the customer ultimately gets cash back.
Right. Mm-hmm. From the business.
From the business.
Right. But you were saying who delegates that extra percent back to the business? You were saying, where is that coming out of?
Oh,
the currents.
What percent the business accepts?
No,
or
what they get
the transaction fee
after the fact.
Yeah. So
would you say 2.5 or something like that?
Oh, what percentage is it? Yeah, we're still working on. It's probably going to be somewhere between 5 and 10%, but we are ultimately going to be sharing the transaction fee with the nonprofits as well.
With the nonprofits, okay.
So they will actually be able to use it as a fundraising tool in addition to a rewards program.
Okay, so so you're saying that this is a difficult concept to totally get my head around.
There's a lot all at once.
Yeah. So you're saying that the nonprofits go through the exchange again. So
Sure.
I've got, I'm going to go and buy whatever good or service, right? And I've got
I've given hours
Yeah.
for a nonprofit
So I've
already.
got 20 currents,
Yep.
whatever, just say. And so I go and buy the thing, and but I pay full price. And then at the end of the month, you guys basically send that business an invoice for that percentage. You cut a check, or cut a check or whatever to me.
Yeah.
Or
So,
however it comes in, direct deposit or that kind of thing.
So that'll be added. You'll have an Open Currents account with dollars in it.
Yeah.
And so when you get cash back, that'll be in
Goes
your account,
into
kind of
your
like
account.
in your PayPal account or something.
Yeah, right.
And then you can cash out to your bank account from there.
Okay. And then, so once I'm at that phase where that money has gone into my currents account, then take me from there. What else is happening after that?
So I can, if I still have currents in my account, then I can continue to redeem offers that businesses have placed in the marketplace.
Right.
Once I get my dollars back at the end of the month, then I can cash out to my bank account, and I've essentially now received value for my volunteer time.
Totally. So, but then it felt like your first description had another level.
Oh, gotcha. So with the business, so basically what's happening is the business and the customer are exchanging dollars for currents.
Right.
And so when the customer gets dollars, the customer gives currents to the business. So then the business has a choice at that point, where they can either keep the currents as an asset that may grow in value as more people use it,
Right.
or they can donate it back to the community and get a tax deduction.
And the community being
the Open Currents community. So
the nonprofit aspect.
Right. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And there's a couple different ways that we're looking into what to do at that point.
Yeah.
One possibility is actually that we use this as a way to raise funds for ourselves. So, there's all these kind of ICOs going on out there in kind of the alternative currency space, where people are raising money. And so if we raised money from investors, we could say, okay, these currents that get donated become a pool that investors can actually buy.
Right.
And then that's a fundraising tool for us to keep ourselves sustainable.
That's interesting. There's a new, I just sort of relate it into the music world now. There's a new platform that allows people, like any one of us, could essentially buy out the royalties of particular artists. So I don't know if you know how that works, but essentially, an artist writes a song, that song, or has a body of work, and once they've established a relationship with a collection agency like ASCAP or BMI or CSAC, whatever, that those collection agencies basically get money on their behalf for every time it's played on the radio, or it's licensing fees, or if somebody's covering it in a club, or even as the performer, if you're playing your own songs, you're getting money for that, right? So now there's a platform, but a lot of that's just like whatever, kind of like down the road, right? So, somebody who's written a hit song 40 years ago that still keeps, like Blueberry Hill or something, it's like that song is still, somebody's mailbox is still getting a paper check, with royalties. I don't know how much, but that's still coming in down the road. Well, a lot of artists, for whatever reason, would rather just have the money up front. Like, hey, I need money now because I got a big, house I got to pay for, or whatever their thing is, so essentially you can buy the future royalties for a smaller amount. So it's like, hey, based on this artist's history or this song's history or whatever, I think that I can probably make over the long haul maybe 50 grand on it or more, because I'm going to basically own the rights to those residuals, those royalties. But I'll pay you 30 grand right now. Sure. And then just hope that it'll just keep getting money down the road, and it'll just trickle in, as opposed to, so it's kind of saw a little parallel with that.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting. I like that.
So where do you see this, in your ideal world? How do you see open currents really affecting the market space?
Yeah, so we are very much focused on Austin for the time being. Sure. And really looking to kind of gain that level of critical mass here. Yeah. But going forward, the dream is really that anyone, anywhere in the world, can create earned currency by giving their time. People who can't necessarily or don't necessarily have access to normal jobs within the dollar market, right? Whether they're unemployed or whether they are coming out of prison, ultimately anyone can give time for the greater good, right? And ultimately, it feels to me anyway like this is how currency should have always been, right? And actually, it probably was this way, and in some cases was this way. Before government actually kind of controlled money, because money existed before government ever did. Right. And to where you have to do something for others to create currency. So there's an example of these clay jars, these water jugs being used as currency in the Middle East, I believe. Because everybody needed to fetch water. And so, there was some intrinsic value to the currency. Yeah. Whereas now it's basically, money's just printed.
Totally fiat, yeah.
And it's just
you can use it as toilet paper or, to build a fire or,
and,
but functional value is pretty low.
Very much so. And money has value because we say it does. Yeah, totally. And so getting back to that concept of, currency having intrinsic value, right? And giving everyone access is really key to kind of reaching that level of critical mass. Yeah. Where, you have no gatekeepers other than the nonprofit organizations that the community has, given the right
Yeah.
too.
So how would you select, like, who decides who's in and who's out?
So right now, since we're so small and the word isn't really out about us yet,
Sure.
we're getting to kind of reach out to the nonprofits who we feel are a good fit. There's not no real controversy around the issues that they're really supporting. It's environmental issues and different focuses. Ultimately, it's going to be essentially a community vote.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody in the community will get to say yes or no. This nonprofit should have a right to issue currents. We will have certain kind of minimum requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think one thing that's interesting is looking at kind of the efficiency of the of the nonprofit. So
Yeah.
like, what percentage of donations is going to to actually solving the issue, as opposed to paying executives,
Employees,
Totally. And so things like that are relevant.
Yeah, and my friend just posted, who's very much an activist and has been involved in all kinds of activist stuff throughout his life, worked on Sea Shepherd and all that kind of stuff, and works up in Oregon. And he was posting essentially about, kind of criticizing a lot of nonprofits, essentially saying, which I actually did a short documentary for the McCombs Business School on a book called The 86% Solution, which was by Dr. B.J. Mahajan, who's a professor there. And he was essentially promoting the idea of capital, how to describe it, sort of dismantling the nonprofit notion that essentially, like, a business can be for profit and for good simultaneously. Sure. And that their value structures can be designed so that they're actually operating, as capitalist for-profit business-oriented things, but that their value structure is just different. That capital isn't the only thing, or potentially the primary thing.
Yeah.
That they've just reorganized those values, but they still are creating a viable product or service.
Yeah.
That they essentially get something for in the marketplace of ideas, instead of just being, because what he's noticed, he's from India, was that throughout his whole life, so many of these nonprofits are just almost parasitic. It's almost like they need the problem to exist so that they can justify their own existence, and that in decades worth of begging for money and grants and and all this stuff, they never actually solve the problem they're there to solve, and so that becomes an interesting question when you're talking about, like, okay, maybe the nonprofit concept is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
I definitely agree that for-profit, or that you can tackle big social issues in a for-profit model.
Yeah.
I think that, there's different ways to go about it, but at the end of the day, whatever you're trying to do, you do need to have money flowing in through your doors in order to stay sustainable.
Right.
And actually, create an organization bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
And so I think there's definitely ways to tackle these issues either from a for-profit or a non-profit model. I think there's good and bad ways to run an organization regardless. Of which way you go about it.
Yeah.
And so, I think that, ultimately we are looking at those organizations that we think are doing a good job.
Sure.
And I also think it's interesting that, ultimately we do have an option in the future of kind of moving beyond the nonprofit designation in our model, where instead of the community saying, these organizations are in and these are not,
right,
to actually saying, okay, anyone can actually pitch a project, a social impact project, and the community can say yes or no to that project.
Right.
And moving beyond
The formalized sort of structured. It's like, oh, this can only happen if we've got our 501c3 and have jumped through all the red tape and got our papers in alignment. It's like, oh, this thing needs to be done. It's simple as like, hey, our road is chock full of potholes and the city clearly doesn't give a crap. Would we like to maybe fix that ourselves? And let's go in on that and just sort of, that's what I'm sort of talking about when, you're talking about really pulling the control and the decision making down to a much more community oriented. I mean, even a city like Austin, every corner of Austin has its own issues. So it's like, you can't even say like, oh, Austin's big problem is X. It's like, well, it does have a big problem like in the way of traffic. So that's something like that we really have to have some structured organizational complicated discussions about, because like, we're not a dictatorship yet, so we can't we can't just like do what China does and relocate a gazillion people so that we can change it to our what we think is going to be a better solution. So then it's like we've got to finesse this thing when you're talking about something that complicated. But there are certain things that are clearly not that complicated. I know the housing issue here is a big one, and I know that there's a lot of organizations working pretty hard. Do you know Ruben Cantu?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Ruben is working in those areas as well, like education and empowerment of entrepreneurial ideas, but usually philanthropic oriented, and so it's like, okay, how do we solve the housing problem, and how do we circumnavigate all the government jibber jabber, that also, in one way is designed to maybe solve some problems, but in many ways ends up creating more down the line,
Definitely. Yeah. And I think ultimately, when it comes to tackling these issues, sometimes they feel so big, right?
Yeah.
And what to do. But at the end of the day, solving them comes down to individual actions that we can take and that we all know we can take. And incentivizing those actions is the root, and just kind of boiling it down to its basics, and not really kind of trying to kind of swallow the whole thing at once.
Solve everything at once. What's your experience in terms of your own volunteer background? Have you done much in terms of volunteering with organizations like that, and who?
Some, not as much as I would like to have, but I've done a fair amount with Keep Austin Beautiful and with Bike Austin. It's the one that I'm primarily volunteering with right now. They're kind of doing the most to kind of test our model right now. Yeah. And so always looking for more. I've done a little bit with Habitat for Humanity and things like that as well. Yeah. But yeah, I definitely feel it when I do it, just the kind of, it just, there's something that feels right about it, that, maybe bringing ourselves into balance with kind of the community and the ecosystem, and, just giving a little bit of time on a regular basis, to the public good. If you're ignoring it and you're kind of like leaving it to somebody else, ultimately it is out of balance, and you feel it, maybe, if you're not doing it, you're not thinking about it directly like that, but you have these kind of side effects that are ultimately kind of showing you, okay, you're kind of ignoring what's ultimately this part of you, right? And so, yeah, it definitely has some intrinsic benefits beyond, the reward that we're kind of offering. Yeah, and that's why, so many people have been doing it for so long, but a lot of people haven't. About 75% of the country does not volunteer in a given year. And so, there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, our time is becoming more and more occupied. And the prospect of kind of giving our time without receiving feels like, feels kind of
Off.
strange also.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, kind of tuning into that intrinsic value can be important. But, we're really interested in bringing a whole new group of people to the table with this model. And we think a lot more good can be done as a
By
result.
incentivizing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking, I think a couple weeks ago I had this idea, sort of woke up with it, with like having a national, or no, I mean, ideally like an international day of altruism. Like what would it look like if you just took a day, in the entire world and just said, what can I do for somebody else without thinking about a direct reward? There's a really great book called The Man Who Gave Up Money. And it's basically this guy, very intelligent, degreed individual, but just like so philosophically dialed in my opinion. It's like, I feel like you listen to this guy talk and you think like, if there was a modern day Jesus, this guy would probably be it. 'Cause it's just, he's so connected to nature. He basically lives in the wilderness in Utah. In the state parks, I guess, or whatever, and he just lives in a cave, and he forages, and he sort of like freegan, dumpster dive probably, and people give him stuff or whatever, but he's really aware of like us as a species being the only one who takes account of everything, and that in nature everything is really self-regulating, and humans are the only ones who kind of have stepped out of that self-regulating capacity and sort of left it up to either the authority figures, the hierarchical kind of dynamic. And he's he used an example of a bear goes through the woods, it finds some raspberries, it's not like this sort of thing of account. It eats the raspberries happily and then goes and craps the seeds down the way, and then the seeds become more raspberry bushes, and the same with the bird. And there's just this natural flow of reciprocity. It's not like I'm going to eat your raspberries and down the road you get the payoff of moving your progeny somewhere else. And I really like that imagery of like, okay, to really trust that the flow of the universe is a little woo, but it's all just moving. It's all his energy just moving. And that if you have the conscious awareness of like, I'm just giving because I'm abundant, really believing that, on a soul level, and that you also know that the nature of the universe is that it's going to come back around. It may not be from the same person. It may not be the thing that you think you want, your ego wants or needs, or, I think it's just more of like, it's a very different paradigm to sort of view the world, to really think, oh, like I'm going to have this experience with you, or give you this thing that I've had, and you're going to take it and go and enjoy it. And there's some reward in knowing that maybe you'll enjoy it, blah, blah, blah. But also knowing that at some point, probably not in the near too distant future, somebody will bequeath me with whatever that thing is, and to really just sort of trust that. So the idea of a, International Day of Altruism is like, yeah, what would the world look like if everybody just said, I'm not going to pursue my own selfish interests today, which is pretty much what we do all the time. Yeah. I'm actually going to just look and see how I can serve, even if it's just some small way. Like, even if it's just buying you've seen those experiments where it's like, buy the person behind you coffee at the Starbucks or whatever. I'm just pay for the car behind you and see how far that goes, And I love that kind of stuff. I think it really points to something that is... that could potentially really dismantle in a good way the system works now, because the system really caters to base behavior. I mean, it's that whole thing of greed is good, right? So it's just sort of the fundamental value structure is like, self-service, like being putting yourself first. And to sort of flip that on its head, the ripple effect from that, I think, it's hard to even fathom what that could look like.
Absolutely. I mean, one kind of goal of ours is to have a day, and I think it would fit pretty well with the International Day of Altruism, where in one day we create 1 million currents. And that could look like 1 million people giving 1 hour on a day. Yeah. Right?
That's awesome.
And I think that, it's still, even when you're receiving something, it's still fundamentally about, putting that energy out there.
Totally.
And knowing it's going to come around.
Yeah.
And I think that, we're not that far away from that day.
Yeah.
It sounds massive, and it is big, but it's not that many steps away.
Yeah, totally. Not in the world now, where you
Right.
just have access to audiences globally in the multi-millions.
Yeah.
With not that much in the way of advertising dollars or whatever.
Yeah.
One viral video away from that kind of influence.
Mm-hmm.
One cleverly created little goofy video that people share to the multi-millions of other people, and suddenly you've got this brand awareness that's just explosive. I mean, things now can blow up in ways that are just unheard of. I mean, the stupidest things too, but also really beautiful things, really like with good messages. And I think I just saw, I hate to give them credit, but it's a fast food joint that did an advertisement about bullying. I don't know if you saw it, but it's basically they're like setting up this bullying situation with this kid in the restaurant, and watching secret cameras, hidden cameras, how people are reacting, if they're doing anything about it or whatever. And then they got a guy in the back who's bullying the burger. And so these people get burgers that have been punched and they're just broken, and they're like complaining, like, why is this, look like this? And they're like, oh, did you bully that burger? They're asking the employee, did you bully that burger? He's like, well, if you would have seen me bully that burger, would you have stopped me from doing that? I'm like, yeah, of course. And it's like, oh, good to know. Because, they're, of course, sitting there watching this kid get bullied and not doing anything about it. So it was really good.
Yeah.
In that sense, very clever marketing. And it's the kind of thing that is going to go viral. Whatever their agenda is probably to sell more burgers and yada, yada, yada. But it's like, if you're going to do it, at least piggyback on something that actually has some meaning and some merit.
Totally.
So it's like, in that way, I can't fault them. Yeah. For using piggybacking on a cause, because it does bring an awareness, but at the same time, it's like, don't buy the food. Start there.
Yeah. Well, and if you're gonna spend the marketing dollars, you might as well spend them towards something more than just
profit.
Selling. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. So personally, you talked about the bike thing. What are the subjects? What are your personal passions? The things that you feel like. These are things that I would really like to see solved, or at least some movement towards solving them in my lifetime. Yeah,
I mean, I just look at anything that gives me a sense of injustice.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of human rights type issues. Our prison system is one that just infuriates me, really.
Yeah, sure.
How once you have that label of an, it's
ex-con.
So, yeah, that's the one that came to mind. I didn't even want to say it.
Yeah.
It's so hard to, break out of that. That's a big one for me, and just like how, now like the private prison stuff, like just like
it's how slave labor,
disgusting. There's, and a lot of kind of this kind of haves versus have-nots, and like developing countries where, no matter how kind of capable you are to run a business or something, it's not possible to get a loan. Right? They say, oh, well, you don't have credit, you can't get a loan. Well, there's no way to get credit. Right. And it's kind of set up by design, in my opinion, to keep things the way they are, and keep people with, the resources and everybody else without. And these are the issues that I really think that we can make a huge step to, really helping people get back on their feet, like helping people have a source of income and wealth, but ultimately just, helping people feel valued. Totally. And feel, that other, that society actually cares about them and values what they are giving, and what they're able to give. And, even just that little seed can shift somebody's mindset to, 180 degrees to where they, it empowers them to do all sorts of things and create all kinds of things and see, and recognize the problem that they've been stuck in and actually step out of it and see a really straight, a really simple solution and something that they are totally capable of transforming,
participating in, and helping transform.
Yeah.
So where do you think that happened for you? What in your life? Maybe it's always been, but I guess I don't know if I could even answer this question, but I feel like there are some areas where I could point to in my development as a human being where I saw that as a problem, because I don't feel like everybody actually sees that as a problem.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, that's just how it is. They don't actually ever ask the question why. So where for you in your development arc did you decide, like, I'm going to make some portion of my life about trying to remedy what I perceive as injustice in the world?
There's a couple things that come to mind. The earliest was recognizing that I myself came from a pretty well-off background, kind of like an upper middle class family.
Sure.
I had a nanny growing up who raised me, and she was always very frugal and resourceful.
Yeah.
And I really embraced that value and became very resourceful myself. And actually, more recently, I realized that that this belief had actually stuck with me and taken on an interesting kind of side effect, which is, I ultimately had created this. Well, basically, I was, struggling with money more recently, and doing the startup life and starving artist kind of thing. And recognized that the root of that was this belief. Like, I kind of have this idea that we create from our beliefs, and our beliefs create our reality. And so I realized that I had this kind of underlying belief that it was better to be poor.
Right. It's more noble.
No, yeah. Totally. And so, that was one piece where, that became kind of this badge of honor. But so there was a certain sense of injustice of like rich versus poor initially for me.
Sure.
I think more recently, going in high school was a big kind of transformational time for me. I went to a Jesuit high school and just very, very kind of more liberal leaning side of the Catholic Church and more kind of social justice oriented. And really, they really challenged us to question authority, question beliefs in our religion and everything else, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
And ultimately, question the way things were,
right?
And just saw a lot of injustice. I went to a School of the Americas protest back in the day.
Yeah.
It's now has a different name, which is like, kind of like taken
obfuscated in a appropriate way.
Right, yeah. And just kind of the injustices that had been done through that training program, kind of a military training program to train militants to suppress the poor in Central and South America.
Right.
And so those, I think those were big turning points for me where really, seeing the injustice and really feeling it.
Yeah.
And, not always knowing what to do about it, but knowing that I wanted to, and that I would find a way to do something.
Help solve these things, or at least put your stamp on it. Do you ever feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of some of the issues that we're dealing with as a planet?
No.
Really?
I have before.
Mm-hmm.
I choose a mindset of trust that, we've come this far as a planet. Mm-hmm. There's actually a really great TED Talk called When Ideas Have Sex.
That's awesome.
It's about the evolution of ideas.
Yeah.
And he talks about how, throughout history, we've always had these kind of paranoid like catastrophe scenarios. And a lot of energy goes towards kind of feeding into those.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, none of them have actually happened. There's been catastrophes and so forth, but we continue on, and we ultimately solve, our biggest challenges, or we adapt. And often both.
Right.
And so I have faith in humanity ultimately that we will continue to solve the problems, and we'll continue to do what needs to be done. I stay focused on, as much as possible, on my piece of it.
Yeah.
I think if as long as we all do our piece, then we are going to continue kind of overcoming our greatest challenges. And putting energy into that worry and fear is ultimately only stopping us from doing our part.
Sure. Self-defeating.
Yeah.
So let's wrap it up with, and I'm just start doing this because it's the show's called The Wisdom Distillery, and I haven't really been like, okay, well, like distill down for me what's Danny's life wisdom that you would say, like, what do you abide in? I mean, kind of touched on it here, but like, if you can sort of whittle it down.
Sure.
Like what does that look like?
I've always wanted this opportunity.
Nice.
That's true. I like to share wisdom wherever possible. Together we thrive. It's a big one. It's one of the kind of core tenets of what we do. From what we believe, we create. That we ultimately can take responsibility for everything in our lives and our lives as a whole, and in doing so, we have full power to change and to transform our lives in any direction that we wish, and that we've only scratched the surface of what we are collectively capable of. The internet has been around for like 25 years. We're only we've been trying to solve big problems for a long time, and so we've only kind of reached the beginning of what we can achieve together. And I could go on forever, but I think those are kind of the main ideas that are kind of most important to me right now.
Do you feel like we will ever do you think we'll make it to the point where we're a multi-planet species? And do you think that's going to be a requirement for the species to continue on, given the fact that throughout history there have been cataclysmic events, and that the reality in terms of geologic and cosmic time of the human experience is a dot, it's a blip in the whole thing, and that there have been historical events that have basically essentially annihilated entire planets, or at least most of the species on the planet. So I love the optimism. At the same time, there's also this sort of historic reality that our time is pretty brief, in general, as an individual and collectively, and that there are events unforeseen or not ill prepared for, which now NASA and different organizations are much more aware of the fact that, like, these huge rocks keep passing between us and the moon, and within our periphery, that if we're on a slightly different trajectory could very well transform the planet as we know it, without us having to have any say so in the matter. So what do you have any thoughts about that?
I don't see a need to become a multiplanetary species in order to survive. I wouldn't I wouldn't say that we will never travel to other planets or exist on other planets. I still think, we are capable of solving any problems that come our way, including giant asteroids.
Yeah,
if
Armageddon
one day
style.
we know, we see it coming, right?
Yeah.
Right. Armageddon, exactly.
Fly up there with a rocket.
Yeah, we know the solution. We just drill into the asteroid.
That's right.
So.
Blow it up. Change its course. We've already seen it. And, like, Hollywood has already given us the plan. What do we need? Yeah, that's great.
It might take one man's sacrifice.
That's right.
Might have to lose Bruce Willis.
No.
No.
That's awesome.
And
do you say that because you're attached to the Earth, or you don't want to see that as an excuse to basically run roughshod over the Earth, just to sort of like, oh, now we have to be a multi-planet species because we ruined the first one?
Right. Yeah.
Is that why you think that way?
I do think there's an aspect of that. I think that ultimately, things can change so quickly.
Sure.
And ultimately, the things that need to be changed are ultimately individual choices.
Mm-hmm.
And once you reach certain levels of, once you have enough people who are making those changes, it becomes a whole lot easier for everybody else to jump on board. And,
100th monkey kind of.
Yeah. So I would not underestimate our ability to transform into a society that would be unrecognizable to the one that we have today.
Totally. And how would you factor in population and resources into that equation?
Yeah, I think that we do. That is an interesting problem, and I do think that there's going to be kind of self-regulation on a planetary level of, there are going to be natural disasters and things like this. I think that ultimately, we will find a way,
or nature will find a way.
Right. And I think even in our culture, and so, there can be shifts that happen
Totally.
that affect these kind of issues.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it does require this kind of shift, and we are all capable of making the shift necessary.
Yeah.
There's no such thing. I don't believe that it's too late to fix anything.
Totally.
So that's where I'm at with those kind of things.
Is there anything else? Well, why don't you give a plug, I guess, for the projects that you're working on, just so people can find you and find out more about these organizations and things that you're involved in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, opencurrents.com.
Mm-hmm.
Currents spelled like the stream, the currents of water.
Yep.
And all the information that you need there to join the community and get going. Can come out to Keep Austin Beautiful and to Bike Austin. And also nominate an organization that you volunteer with that you would like to issue currents for your time. And that's really where this is going to reach the next level when organizations and when businesses are hearing, oh, I want you to be part of Open Currents.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, where it kind of takes on a life of its own and can really reach that critical mass that is going to really start solving or really start kind of, offering a real alternative to kind of the current model.
Yeah. And actually get some work done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Danny.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
Pleasure having you.
Yeah.
Talk to you. So that was my interview with Danny Pernick of Open Currents. I really suggest you have a look into what they're doing. It's an evolving thing, but I think it's a thing that's well worth putting some love into. And it's totally incentivized, so it's a win-win all the way around. If you like the music, that is from Otis McDonald. Both tracks that you heard today were from Otis McDonald. He's such a badass. I'm really excited that I found his stuff on the YouTubes, and that he makes it available for free, royalty-free. Not all of it, but a substantial amount of it, and some really, really great stuff. He's quite the man. So check him out on otismacmusic.com. I want to give him a shout-out. And, thanks again for listening. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. We got a bunch of great guests coming up in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned. Please, if you like it, share it. If you like what I'm doing, you can check me out or check out what I'm doing at shamanjohnmusic.com and thewisdomdistillery.net. I've got a Patreon link there that you can go and support this podcast, help me do a bunch more. We actually want to take this thing out on the road and start to interview people from other than Austin. But we'll be doing that via Skype or whatever technology I have to futz with to make that happen anyway. But thanks again. It's really good to have these conversations with people and expand our knowledge, isn't it, people? Let us expand our knowledge and awareness and understanding of the world around us. Aho. Have a great week. See you again.